Imagine waking up strapped to a chair, your mind no longer your own. LSD was injected without consent. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo wanted to find out. 24 young men were chosen, watching as human nature spiraled into cruelty. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study began in 1932. They wanted to see what would happen. By the time the truth was exposed in 1972, people were injected with chemicals, had their limbs frozen solid. The Japanese Imperial Army built a facility so cruel that even Nazi experiments pale in comparison. The 5 most horrific human experiments in history. Some say science exists to push the boundaries of knowledge, but what happens when those boundaries are shattered with no regard for human life?
I was given a glass of Kool-Aid, and so were the other children. This Kool-Aid was spiked with LSD. It was horrible.
These are the darkest chapters of history, experiments so horrifying that they should never be forgotten. From secret government mind control projects to nightmarish torture chambers, here are the 5 most horrific human experiments in history, and they only get worse as we go on. 5. MKUltra, the CIA's mind control nightmare. Imagine waking up strapped to a chair, your mind no longer your own, your thoughts, your memories, manipulated like a puppet on a string. Welcome to MKUltra. In the 1950s, the CIA launched one of the most secretive and disturbing programs in history, MKUltra. Their goal? To create the ultimate form of mind control. Prisoners, mental patients, and even unwitting civilians were subjected to electroshock therapy, forced drug trips, and psychological torture. LSD was injected without consent, breaking minds like fragile glass. Some victims never recovered, some disappeared completely, and worst of all, many records were destroyed, leaving us wondering how deep the horror truly went.
Patients at psychiatric hospitals, prisoners in federal institutions, and even people in the public were given drugs without their awareness or consent and experimented upon.
4. The Stanford Prison Experiment. When power corrupts, absolutely. What happens when you strip away someone's identity and replace it with power? In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo wanted to find out, but what he discovered was terrifying. 24 young men were chosen. Half would be prisoners, half would be guards, but within just hours, the roles became real. The guards, just regular students, transformed into sadistic enforcers. They humiliated, beat, and psychologically tortured the prisoners.
This is unbelievable. They took my clothes. Hands off the door.
They made them beg for food, strip naked, and endure sleepless nights under constant abuse. And the most chilling part? Zimbardo let it continue, watching as human nature spiraled into cruelty until it became too much to bear. After just 6 days, the experiment was shut down. But the damage had already been done. This was no longer a psychology experiment.
It evolved into a confrontation. The guards showing the prisoners who's boss.
It was proof of how easily we become monsters when given absolute power. 3. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, a 40-year deception. For 4 decades, doctors in the United States carried out a cruel and unforgivable lie, all in the name of science. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study began in 1932. Hundreds of poor African-American men were told they were receiving free health care. In reality, they were being used as test subjects, left untreated as their disease slowly destroyed them. Even when penicillin became a known cure, doctors refused to treat them. They wanted to see what would happen at the cost of human lives. By the time the truth was exposed in 1972, dozens had died. Families were ruined, and the American government had permanently shattered the trust of an entire community.
So today, America does remember the hundreds of men used in research without their knowledge and consent. We remember them and their family members. Men who were poor and African American. Without resources and with few alternatives, they believed they had found hope when they were offered free medical care by the United States Public Health Service. They were betrayed.
2. The Nazi experiments. Science turned to horror. During World War II, Nazi doctors carried out some of the most nightmarish experiments ever recorded. Under the command of Joseph Mengele, prisoners, men, women, and even children, became human test subjects in a twisted pursuit of science. People were injected with chemicals, had their limbs frozen solid, or were sewn together in grotesque attempts to create superior humans. Some victims were operated on without anesthesia. Others were forced into gas chambers just to see how long they could survive. When the war ended, many of these scientists escaped justice, but the horror they inflicted remains one of the darkest stains on human history. 1. Unit 731, Japan's secret house of horrors. If hell had an earthly location, it would be Unit 731. Hidden in the shadows of World War II, the Japanese Imperial Army built a facility so cruel that even Nazi experiments pale in comparison. Men, women, and even children were subjected to live dissections. Without anesthesia, some were infected with deadly diseases just to study the effects. Others were locked in pressure chambers until their bodies exploded. Prisoners were deliberately frostbitten, injected with plague, or burned alive, all while scientists took notes. The horrors of Unit 731 were so extreme that even the most hardened war criminals were shocked. And the worst part? Many of these doctors were never punished. Some even went on to work in government and medicine. Conclusion: the dark side of science. These experiments reveal something terrifying. The greatest horrors don't come from monsters. They come from people in lab coats. People who believed their research was more important than human life. What are your thoughts? Could these horrors ever happen again? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories from the darkest corners of history.